Let's get to management accounts for the last sort of 15 minutes of this episode. So for the viewers' perspective, so my business is current. We've just employed an accountant, full-time accountant, and we are now going to be completely revamping our monthly management accounts, of which we have very little at the moment. For full transparency, we're like any sort of business in this sort of fast sort of pace environment. We're constantly looking at things on a daily to weekly basis. What capital requirements, cash flow requirements, that's the sort of continuous process we're in. But we want to get to a point where we're just monthly management accounts. We can see past month performance. We can forecast into the future. And you do that by capturing key data points from your business's finances, whether that's cash flow, creditors and debtors, debt, all kinds of things. So throwing it out to you two first, start with Jack. Monthly management accounts. One, do you do them? And do you think you could improve on them? And then advice on what to look for in monthly management accounts and how to sort of structure them.
Yeah, really, 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 really important. Shame Dorian's gone because my car analogy is your management accounts are the engine of the business and the health of the engine that you're running under your bonnet. So we about 2.5, maybe 3 years ago, paid a company called UFD run by Josh, really entrepreneurial guy, to set up all the templates for all of our businesses. So we're a group of over 20 businesses. They all feed into each other. They all lend each other money. They all pay each other invoices. They all have their own client base. They all have their own P&Ls. They all have their own balance sheets. So super complicated structure. So he built out all these spreadsheets, and then we then got a bookkeeping company who then go on those spreadsheets every single hour of the day, and they upload invoices to Xero, compile information, consolidate data, and then report that back to us monthly from a monthly management account. So we get P&Ls, project performances, balance sheets, intercompany loans, future work in progress costs, and then a collative cash flow, as well as a forecast. We've got about a 2-year forecast that we recently reviewed. It's then mine and Ben's job to then go into that forecast and manually edit future prospects, incomes, outgoings, because they're not actually transacted yet. So your bookkeeper and your accountant manages everything that's happened, which is really important to forecast. But there's obviously big swing moments where you're exchanging on a site, buying a site, selling a site, lending money, borrowing money, whatever it may be, that you need to put your handle on to those forecasts. It's absolutely imperative to be looking at that. Like, if you don't have that financial clarity, it's really, really difficult to manage the businesses that we do, even down to a project specific case. So I now know that if an asset is underperforming, it's because there's a spike in the profit margin of one particular HMO. I look at it and go, what happened there? And they go, well, the boiler stopped working, so we had to refund 2 tenants their rent for that week. Then you go, well, why don't we fix the boiler? Because we've now lost 300 quid. And you can sort of almost manage the business at an arm's length from a financial perspective. And it's a super, super imperative and important. And that's exactly how we do ours. It's also really useful to have someone that's dialed down into the bookkeeping, because it's a very admin heavy task. And I can even go to our bookkeeper and say, we finished this project. This is what we sold it for. Can you get me the collective total work in progress? Here's the completion statement on purchase. Here's the completion statement on exit. And I want to work out the total profit in writing so that I can then divvy out the profit to the investor. And then that's all done. All of that is done. Obviously, I know it to some degree because we're tracking costs through the project, but they literally tell it to the penny, and then you just pay the investor out and you move on. And then that gets filed, and it's super, super important.
Do you also track overhead performance, Jack?
As in what, like, a fee earner's overheads costs are against what they're earning?
Yeah.
Into the business. Yeah, not so much in we do in our development company to some degree. Our overheads, our collective overhead is about 1% of our delivery pipeline, and that's obviously spread over 2 years, so about 2%. Obviously, we're trying to make about 20% margin on our delivery pipeline. So if we're delivering today 32 million, we're obviously trying to make 16 million turnover per year, because most of our projects are over a year. And out of that 16 million, we're trying to make 20% return. So we're operating about 2% to delivery is what we're delivering. And that's a really key metric, because otherwise you can become really busy fools and end up having quite a comprehensive team that doing deals that are way too small for the outfit that you're in. It's a lot easier in our surveying business. We believe that most fee earners should be 4xing their salary. That's kind of like a good rule of thumb to work off. similar in architectural practices, or I'm sure from a lofts perspective, probably similar. A gang of boys that can knock out a 70 grand loft, they really should be 3 or 4xing their cost, because you've got that's your cost of sales, which is all of the, if you did the job or not, that cost to that project is associated with that project. But then obviously your net profit associated with the office, the people answering the phone, the invoicing, the fees around the business operations, regardless, the fixed costs. Fixed cost versus variable cost, right? And we're talking about variable costs. But yeah, we do in our surveying business, not so much in our devco, because it's kind of like you're typically working on such large projects that when it's going wrong, it's not because you're not hitting the multipliers on your salaries. It's normally because of a bigger problem that you wouldn't have been able to control.
And what about you, Stu, particularly from the construction perspective, how are you managing the accounts?
We measure everything. So I've got someone in our accounts team full time, who does all the invoices, tracks every project individually. Every invoice goes on. It's all tracked to each project. I get a beginning of the month and the end of the month. So target, forecast, and then actual forecast. I can see what a P&L looks like every month. Our balance sheet. We use ClearBooks, which I've used since we set up. There's Zero and all the rest of them. This one was built for builders effectively, with the CIS and all the other stuff that it can do, which 15, 16 years ago was obviously a godsend. Yeah, I can see obviously our sales, our purchases. It's just really clear, and we can sort of forecast based on where we think the business is going, so we can sort of put in budgets and stuff, which is where we want to work on now, is to plow in all the numbers of what we know we spend on these jobs. And then we'll be able to, rather than take someone full-time procurement, I'm actually going to try and outsource some of the data entry, and then use my accounts guy to help me with the procurement, because with the stage 4 drawings and with what we know we want to buy, I'm sort of going to blend his job role into 2, rather than take someone in full-time, which I don't think we need at the moment. So yeah, but all this is all based on the numbers. We can work out exactly what we think we're going to cost, and then when we're going to get it. And if we work closely with the build program, then we can sort of forecast what we're going to get in monthly. But it all comes down to using good software. I can find out any time basically.
Are you tracking phase of works? Are you tracking phase of work?
We are now for Twickenham. We're using Twickenham as our complete start. Everything.
So you don't do that on the loft?
No, not really. Because there's 8 stages or 7 stages of payments through the build, which are done on milestones, and all of our subcontractors and materials are all paid out on the milestones effectively.
So you're not looking at job cost performance, say on the joinery item of works, on the the structural works, the dry lining. Are you looking at those like in isolation?
We will at the end. So our quote was broken down to like 14 stages, so we can actually track our actuals versus our projected on the sales, and then we can see what margin we're making. And then obviously on our overheads, as Jack was saying, we look at our gross margin, or our profit margin, gross profit, and then we will deduct a percentage that we look at. I've got an overhead spreadsheet as well, which we sort of add up all of our annual costs. We divide it by the month. Our jobs take 2 months, so we basically take that percentage of our overheads divided by the amount of jobs we're running, and then as we scale up or scale down, that margin changes. But because we've got more businesses now that are effectively charging some of the overheads, we're diluting the overhead costs quite considerably as well, because we're spreading those costs against other businesses, which in turn helps the ecosystem.
Do you think there's merit in doing it? Because your loft business is similar to our HMO business by design. I literally saw your loft business for the viewers watching, and how you'd systemize that, and knew that if we systemize HMOs in the same way, you can create much more predictability. And we want to try and track the phases of works, because generally they're very similar. Like from fitting en suites to the flooring, furniture, fitting the kitchen, loft conversions, we do single story extensions. We want to track all those phases, so we can not only compare performance between jobs where they're not, nothing's ever going to be like for like, a true like for likeness, but you could still get a good rule of thumb if we could track the phases rather than just overall job performance. Is that, how do you tackle that when you're doing it retrospectively? What are you looking for?
Our payments in are based on the stages of the construction. So you break yours in like you would with the build programs. You do external works, construction, fabric, first fix, electrics, plumbing, plastering, and do those stages. And you could do it per room as well. And we actually, like with our pre-build stuff, I was just thinking as you were talking, so we track time from deposit received through to preliminary sent through to application to building control through to final decisions and sign off. So all I'm looking at is time. So that's how I manage my internal team. But you could apply that to your trades on site. Are these all employed guys you're working with now? Are they subbies per project?
We've still got two full internal gangs on day rates, but we're trying to move everything to price gangs. So we still manage all the labor, but they're working on a price. So they give us a price for the job, which is why it's easier for us to track, because we know that the pricing element of that phase of works is fixed, bar any abnormalities, but that's fixed. So what's our underlying performance becomes a bit easier to track. Day rate lads is so difficult to track it. But
well, what we've done with that is we've used a product called Site Docs. So they sign in the morning. It does a lot of our forms all digitally, and then they will at the end of the day they'll be able to put in what they've done AM and PM, so we can track half day rates. So we know that they've been doing X amount of half days doing Y and X amount doing X, and it just makes it so much easier to work out actually where our core development team are spending their time. So we can use that data moving forward to price things to go, okay, actually that's how long it took to bump that from there to here and all the rest of it. So it's a constant moving target. It's never easy, otherwise everyone would do it. If everyone's on gangs and price rates, then that's what our electricians, plumbers, plasterers, roofers, core team, they're all on fixed prices, which means I can price up front knowing what they're going to be happy to work for, and then we can just track those prices as we go through the build, and then at the end we can measure against the predicted cost to see if we're making a margin. And then obviously if we're not, or the cost of pliers tripled or installations doubled in price, then we can obviously use a different supplier. We can change our original quoting tool. So we're constantly adapting this. We probably do it every 4 to 6 months. We'll just do a quick check and make sure that we're still making the margins we need.
Having the buyer admin is so important for that, isn't it? When you're trying to manage those material prices, and suppliers always increasing, and then the guy you've got the agreement with for those fixed prices, he's on holiday, so a new guy's coming in and he's up the prices again. It's a battle, isn't it? If you don't have that buyer,
if you don't keep them honest, they'll always tweak the prices up. I mean, it's just the way that the world works. And then the uneducated builder, or the guy who's too busy, who's maybe a bit smaller or just a bit naive, will think that these things cost X, and then they go and build it, and then it actually costs them a lot more, or the things have moved over the last few years, and then they start selling the wrong price to future customers using that money that they're going to try and cash flow forward to finish stuff they've already committed to previously, and that starts this big decline. And that's where a lot of builders, not from their own, just from mistakes, they just underprice things, and things always, even if they get the timings right, if they've underpriced it at the start, they're going to go into a project making a loss, and they've got to then sell more to try and finish the ones previously. So yeah, knowing your numbers on every job, and it's a constant, everything's moving underneath you all the time, so you have to monitor that, and that's just a discipline. And when I set Skyloss up, I built that knowing that was our biggest risk, built the whole machine around it. So when we started scaling up, it was easy for us to sort of adapt and just keep changing, rather than trying to. It's a lot harder when you've got a business that's got its systems already in place to change the whole machine, change the whole way it moves. But obviously I was lucky enough to have 3 or 4 months between pushing for sales with Sky Lofts to sort of build the whole thing in my mind, to go, how do we build 100 lofts a year where we've got lots of 5-star reviews, we've got happy customers and a good process, and then just recruited the right people for the right part of the process. And it was all based around this spreadsheet, which you've seen, which is where all the numbers, every business is based on numbers, but you need to be able to adapt them easy enough and change with the times, which helped us massively during COVID. So when COVID happened and materials went up 4 times over 3 months, we could go to all of our existing customers and go to the timber section and say, look, this is the cost of the invoice to get the timber on your scaffolding. It's gone up 1,800 quid. We were making a margin on the original quote, which we're happy to write off on the timber section. To put the timber you need on your scaffolding, it's going to cost us another 1,200 quid, 1,500 quid. It's just transparent business. And they went, we understand. It ain't your fault. We still want the loft. Let's go. And 45 out of 46 customers all agreed and said, we agree. That's a fair way to do it. So they just paid the additional for the timber. We swallowed the margin and we moved on. And without having all that transparency, it would have been a right old mess trying to tell people, oh yeah, it's gone up 2 grand. They're going, you're trying to pull my pants down.
Yeah, exactly. If you don't know
so
the data.
Exactly.
What about you, Jack? Do you and obviously for the viewers' benefit, Jack doesn't have construction in house, but obviously you're managing a lot of large contracts. Do you do anything in your monthly management accounts or job performance accounts to see the progress of your contractors, bar just monitoring surveyors and like the typical sort of drawdown management? Do you look at anything in particular in the construction?
Yeah, so some of our projects are quite large now. So 3 of our projects are £2 million build contract. And when you come with that sort of value of construction, it is weekly site meetings with the contractor, with all the professionals sat around a table, and you do discuss budget. You do discuss where they are, their progress on it. You're wondering if they're drawing down the payments quick enough. Are they keeping on time? So our project managers that's leading on that will run those meetings and make sure that we're on time, we're on budget. If there's any abnormals or changes or altercations, then they can be dealt with. So they're dealt with in those physical meetings. Then what we're actually starting to do more of now is a financial review of the performance of the project from a higher level. So tracking budget to actuals while we're going through the project more, because you can't just rely on a fixed price contract is going to remain the same cost at the end, because there's quite a few costs that come around that contract. That then would fall on mainly Ben, but me also helping review it to see if there's any sort of creativity or ideas to improve the performance of the project. But technically speaking, once we are in a JCT contract, it is time bound and it is cost bound. The most typical excuse that a contractor will use is if they don't have the detail that they need to quote for from the outset. So it's all around them. When we were chatting offline before this call, having all of the package up front. So when we go to tender, we have the whole site stripped out and various junctures of the structure of the building completely exposed, so that so we normally have a different strip out contractor to the quoting contractor for tender. Because what will happen is they'll go, well, I didn't know that was there. I couldn't see through the wall, so I couldn't quote for that. So you're getting a more accurate quote, and it's the more accurate the quote is at the beginning, the easier the project is to deliver for you and them. So yeah, that's just typically picked up in site reviews. I did a £7.5 million office fit out in central London. No structural works. It was all just completely an internal fit out. And there was weekly meetings for the whole duration of the project for 12 months. So that's 30, something like 50 something meetings weekly. And you would have similar agendas, the amount of shit that was on there from months and months ago that you never get resolved. And it's always in the meeting. But it is important that everyone comes together and sits in those meetings to check on everything, essentially.
Yeah, it's a really good bit of advice, actually, that we've never touched on this podcast. And if you've ever worked with builders, you know that if they can walk into a site and it's back to brick already, they go, amazing, I can see everything. There's nothing unpredictable in this building. But the caveat there for the developer is if you do strip it out pre-finance, then your value will come in and downvalue the day one amount. So there's the bit of a chicken and egg there to be careful of. But if you want an accurate cost from a builder, there's some great advice. If you've got it stripped out and at least have the structural membranes open, so that they can see them, albeit you're doing anything structural, then that's how you're going to get a best price, rather than the typical mistake of sending a contractor in, giving them a floor plan and expecting them to come up with an accurate bill of quants. Bless you, Jack. But yeah, it's just bearing in mind that bit of. And how do you deal with that, Jack? Just quick, because I know we're going to close this out in a second. But if you're stripping it out pre-contract, is that pre-finance? Are you worried about down valuation on day one condition of the building? How do you tackle that? No,
that's once we can't see a way to tender out a contract. Obviously, you give them. So this is kind of the process. So we're buying a site. Let's say it's a permitted development scheme. We normally chuck in the application before we exchange, and we normally then exchange the day after we get the permitted development for some form of base conversion scheme to de-risk the project. We'll buy the site. Before we actually complete on the site, we're pulling together a speculative drawing package. We'll send all of the contractors a PQQs. We have a rough idea of what we think we're going to be a build, whether it's between 1 and 2 million contract value. So we're starting to get that process and saying we're going to chuck you a full package in 2 weeks. Be ready to receive it because we want it to turn around by this date. So we start that conversation. Then we complete on the site. The day we complete on site, everything goes in, gets stripped out. Building rates, business rates obviously gets negated. And while we're stripping it out, we're still having those conversations with contractors. Once everything's exposed, we get the final design drawings done and detailed design drawings, structural drawings done. So it's a full package, sort of your stage 4 that Stuart was referring to pre coming online for this. And then that then goes to the contractor so they can quote on that. It's got everything like details of floor finishes, details of structure, literally got everything dialed down. And then they will take weeks to come back on that. So the site just does sit there, not doing anything, but you're kind of slowing down to speed up. And then, so the strip out does happen post-purchase. And you're going to strip the site out. The bank know you're going to strip the site out, right? So yeah, it's once you've bought it, and then you strip it out with a contractor. That doesn't have to be the contractor that you end up building it with.
But you've not got your dev finance in place to get your builder's quote, or have you taken dev finance out based on your worst case cost?
We'll normally have it taken out. We'll normally have dev facility ready to go. Yeah.
So in answer to you then, Rye, they've added the value, got the MA, got the dev finance sorted out, then stripped out, and then obviously they've used their own capital to do it, and then we'll reclaim it once they start on site, which is exactly what we've done with Twickenham.
Yeah. All right, nice, good episode, guys. Technical one, diving into some details there, finances, investors, all kinds of fun bits. And there's so much more we could go on about. So I think we'll bring this back up again, I'm sure, in future episodes. Hopefully, it's been a good one. Big love to everyone watching. Make sure you subscribe